For centuries, the Roman Empire stood as an unshakable fortress of civilization. Its legions were feared and its borders were considered impenetrable. But in the late 4th century, a terrifying new threat emerged from the eastern steppes. The Huns, a nomadic confederation of unparalleled horse archers, swept into Eastern Europe. They destroyed everything in their path. The tribes living north of the Danube River, specifically the Goths, found themselves facing total annihilation. Desperate to survive, hundreds of thousands of Gothic men, women, and children fled south. In the year 376, they arrived at the banks of the Danube River, the northern border of the Roman Empire. The Gothic leader Fritigern pleaded with the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens for asylum. He asked for land to farm in exchange for providing troops to the Roman military. Emperor Valens saw this as an opportunity. A massive influx of new taxpayers and recruits for his army seemed like a political victory. He agreed to let them cross. What followed was one of the greatest humanitarian and administrative disasters in the history of the ancient world. The Roman officials in charge of managing the crossing were deeply corrupt. Instead of providing the promised food and shelter, they ruthlessly exploited the desperate refugees. When the Goths began to starve, Roman generals Lupicinus and Maximus offered them a horrifying trade. They would provide dog meat to the starving refugees, but only in exchange for Gothic children who were taken and sold into slavery. The abuse pushed the Goths to the breaking point. The tension finally erupted at a banquet in the city of Marcianopolis. The Roman governor attempted to assassinate the Gothic leaders during the feast. Fritigern managed to escape. He rallied his people, and the Gothic refugee crisis officially transformed into a full-scale armed rebellion. The Goths began plundering the rich Roman provinces of the Balkans, destroying local militias and arming themselves with captured Roman weapons. Subscribe to Sword and Pen where military might meets political power. Subscribe for more military history and technology content. By 378, Emperor Valens realized the local forces could not contain the uprising. He marched his elite Eastern Field Army from Constantinople to deal with the barbarian threat personally. Valens was a man driven by ego. He knew his nephew Gratian, the Western Roman Emperor, was marching with reinforcements to assist him. However, Valens was jealous of Gratian's recent military successes. He did not want to share the glory of crushing the Gothic rebellion. On August 9, 378, Roman scouts located the Gothic camp near the city of Adrianople. The Goths had formed a massive circle of heavy wooden wagons known as a logger to protect their families and plunder. Valens received reports that the Gothic army only numbered around 10,000 men, believing he had a massive numerical advantage. He ordered his exhausted army to march immediately toward the enemy. This was a fatal intelligence failure. Valens' scouts had only seen the Gothic infantry. They completely missed the massive Gothic cavalry force which was miles away foraging for supplies. The Roman army arrived at the battlefield in the early afternoon. The midsummer heat was absolutely brutal. The Roman soldiers had been marching 4 hours under the scorching sun in full armor. They were exhausted, deeply thirsty, and covered in dust. Fritigern, playing for time, lit massive brush fires across the dry plains. The wind blew the thick smoke directly into the faces of the Roman troops, choking them and adding to their misery. The Roman army deployed into its traditional formation. The heavy infantry held the center while the cavalry protected the left and right flanks. Before Valens could give the official order to attack, the discipline of his army fractured. 2 units of Roman skirmishers on the right wing, acting without orders, charged the Gothic wagon fort. They were quickly repulsed, but their premature attack dragged the rest of the Roman army into the fight before they were fully prepared. The Roman heavy infantry engaged the Gothic foot soldiers at the barricades. The fighting was vicious. The Romans pushed hard against the wagons, but the Goths held their ground, fighting desperately to protect their families trapped inside. Then the earth began to shake. Fritigern's messengers had reached the foraging cavalry. Returning at full speed, thousands of heavily armored Gothic and Alan horsemen crested the hills overlooking the battlefield. They descended on the Roman army like a thunderbolt. The massive cavalry charge slammed directly into the Roman left flank. The tired Roman cavalry was completely caught off guard. They were outnumbered and outmatched. Within minutes, the Roman cavalry collapsed and fled the field, leaving the Roman infantry completely exposed. The Gothic horsemen wheeled around and attacked the Roman center from the sides and the rear. The Roman heavy infantry was now completely surrounded. The tactical situation devolved into a nightmare. The Romans were packed so tightly together by the surrounding enemy that they could barely raise their shields. Ancient historians recorded that soldiers were crushed against one another, unable to draw their swords or even step backward. The Gothic cavalry fired arrows and threw spears into the dense mass of trapped men, while the Gothic infantry pushed outward from the wagon fort. The heat, the smoke, and the sheer crush of bodies led to mass panic. The legendary discipline of the Roman legions evaporated. The battle turned into a chaotic slaughter. The Roman shield wall broke and the army was systematically annihilated. Somewhere in the dust and blood, Emperor Valens himself was killed. Some accounts say he was struck by an enemy arrow in the crush of combat. Other accounts claim he was wounded and carried to a nearby farmhouse, which the Goths then surrounded and burned to the ground, unaware that the Emperor of Rome was trapped inside. When the sun finally set on Adrianople, the Roman Empire had suffered its worst defeat since the Battle of Cannae nearly 600 years earlier. 2/3 of the Eastern Roman field army lay dead on the plains. Tens of thousands of veteran soldiers, elite officers, and the emperor himself had been wiped out in a single afternoon. The Battle of Adrianople shattered the aura of Roman invincibility. The empire never fully recovered its military strength. To replace the devastating losses, Rome was forced to rely increasingly on barbarian mercenaries to fill the ranks of its army. The descendants of the very Goths who fought at Adrianople would eventually become the military backbone of the empire, pulling it apart from the inside until the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed a century later.